Hi friends, I welcome you to Scholar. My name is Akshaya and I shall be taking your medieval history portion of the UPSC syllabus. In this lesson, we shall be studying the Deccan region from around 600 AD to the 750 AD, which is essentially the phase 1 of the early medieval India. Now, before we get into this lesson, let's take a quick recap of what we did in the last lesson. So, in the last lesson, we essentially took a quick overview of the course and the approach that we are going to follow. We also started off with the early medieval India phase 1 for the North India region, in which we studied about the key three dynasties which were ruling at that time, which is the Pushyabhutis or the Vardhanas, particularly talking about the King Harsha, who is the most important ruler of the dynasty and of the Indian history in general. We also talked about the mockeries of Kannauj and the Maitrakas. So these were the things that we covered in the last lesson essentially. So that is to say that we kind of covered completely the North India region from 600 to 750 AD, which is essentially the phase 1 of the early medieval India. Now, I told you in the last lesson as well that there's a timeline approach that we are going to follow, wherein we are going to keep a track of the time period which we are studying. So, I'll repeat again, we have completed the phase 1 of the early medieval India for the North India region, which is the time from around 600 AD to 750 AD. Now we shall move to the same phase for the South India region, and we are further breaking it down to the two regions, which is the Deccan and the far south. So in this lesson specifically, we are covering the Deccan region and we are studying these three dynasties that I have here. And in the next lesson, we shall be covering the far south region and we shall study these four dynasties. So starting off with the Deccan region first of all, let's take a look at where were these three dynasties really located. So in the Deccan region, this is essentially the Chalukya kingdom, or the area where the Chalukyas usually rule from. And you can see this is Badami. But this is your region for the Western Chalukyas, or the first branch. So you see that I have written here three branches of Chalukyas, because these three dynasties are one in some or the other way related to each other, which we shall just see as the lesson progresses. But just understand for now that because these are located on the western side of the country, they are called as the Western Chalukyas. The second branch, or the Eastern Chalukyas of Vengi, are located somewhere here. You can see the capital Vengi here. And the third branch, which is the Chalukyas of Kalyani, were actually a descendant of this branch, and they are also called as the later Western Chalukyas. Now let's just get into these dynasties one by one, starting with the Western Chalukyas of Badami. So the Western Chalukyas of Badami were the rulers, as I said, who ruled from this region essentially, and they succeeded the Vakatakas. I'm sure you've studied about this dynasty in the ancient history, or you will study about them in the ancient history portion. And they succeeded the Vakatakas dynasty, and they gave a stable rule for around 200 years. So the Western Chalukyas from Badami, they ruled for around a period of 200 years, which was a very stable rule, and they were essentially a maritime power. Now you can see that they have this huge coastline to their benefit, so they were a very strong maritime power as well, and their capital was at Vatapi or Badami. So this was called as Vatapi in those times, and this is where they ruled from, or this was their capital. Now they claim in some of their inscriptions, they have claimed to have the Brahmanical origin, and they call themselves as the Haritiputras of the Manavya Gotra. Now this is something that you can remember, because terms are a favorite with UPSC and they sometimes tend to ask them. So you can just remember the dynasty which claimed the Brahmanical origins were the Western Chalukyas, and they call themselves as the Haritiputras of the Manavya Gotra. Now you see, for all of these dynasties we will have many rulers, but there are some rulers which are going to be really, really important, and I'll tell you which are those, and you should definitely remember those names. One such name is of the Pulakeshin I, Pulakeshin II actually, but also remember Pulakeshin I, because Pulakeshin I was the one who founded this dynasty, and who established the independent power of this dynasty. So we studied that they succeeded the Vakatakas dynasty, and they had a rule for around 200 years. It was a stable rule. They were a maritime power, and they had their capital at Vatapi. Vatapi is the older name for the modern day Badami, and they claimed Brahminical origins. They called themselves as the Haritiputras, and it was founded by Pulakeshin I. I've just said in the last slide that there are going to be certain key rulers for each dynasty. So here we have these names: Pulakeshin I, Kirtivarman I, Pulakeshin II. Now you see I've highlighted Pulakeshin II because this is one ruler that you really need to remember. There could even be a direct question, based on Pulakeshin II. Although UPSC does not really ask a political history, but in order for you to get a sense of why a certain thing was happening, we will have to go through that. So we will just deal with that. Then Vikramaditya I, Vikramaditya II, and lastly Kirtivarman II. Now Pulakeshin I you should remember because he was the founder. Starting off with these rulers one by one, let's get to Pulakeshin I. Now Pulakeshin I, I've said already again many number of times, he was the founder of the dynasty. Then Kirtivarman I. Now Kirtivarman I was the one who defeated the Kadambas of Banavasi. This is a place near Mysore, and he defeated very many dynasties. He defeated the Kadambas, the Mauryas of the Konkan region, and the Nalas of the Bastar region. Not a really important ruler, but just to give you a sense of how things were progressing in the dynasty. Now this is an important ruler, Pulakeshin II. As I've written here, he was the most powerful and he was the most famous king. And there is an inscription at the place Aihole in Karnataka, wherein there is a eulogy which is written by his court poet Ravikirti. Now, eulogy is something called as a prashasti, something which is written in the praise of a king. So, something of the sort that you have for Samudragupta in the Allahabad inscription. Similarly, in the Aihole inscription, you have this for the king Pulakeshin II, and it was written by his court poet Ravikirti. You must remember these names because these are really important and they could even be asked directly. So, Ravikirti wrote it. Inscription's name is Aihole, written for the king Pulakeshin II, and this eulogy has his victories against the Kadambas, against the Alupas, against the Gangas, and even the king Harsha. Now Harsha, we spoke about in the last class, in the last lesson, that he was a very, very important ruler, a very strong and a mighty ruler, and the only major defeat that Harsha had to face was at the hands of Pulakeshin II. So you can understand and get a sense of the might and the power of the Pulakeshin II. So particularly talking about the defeat that Harsha had to meet at the hands of Pulakeshin II, he defeated Harsha on the banks of river Narmada, and thus he won himself the path of Dakshin Pateshwara, the Lord of the South. As I've spoken already, it is mentioned in the Aihole inscription. Please remember this fact. Then he also sent an embassy to the Persian king Khusro II, and he's been also spoken of by the Chinese monk Xuanzang, who says that he was very tolerant towards the Buddhism and the Jainism. Now, another conflict, the military conflict, which is famous, we have it here. So, the conflicts with the Pallavas, there were two expeditions, if you see, the first and the second one. Now, the first one was a complete success, and the second one was a complete failure. Let's see how. In the first one, he annexed the region called as Vengi. Now, Vengi is a region between two rivers, Krishna and Godavari. So, it is a very strategic, very fertile and a very prosperous region. So, this is the region that he annexed between the Krishna and the Godavari. Basically, annexed the region Vengi. From whom? From Mahendravarman I. So, Pulakeshin annexed the region Vengi from Mahendravarman I, who was a Pallava, and he made his brother Vishnuvardhan as the viceroy of that region, right? So, he won that region from the Mahendravarman I, and then he placed it under his brother Vishnuvardhan. He made Vishnuvardhan the viceroy of that region, Vengi. Next, let's talk about the second expedition, which was a complete failure. Now, why was this a complete failure? Because the next ruler, or the Narasimhavarman I of the Pallava dynasty, he was again a very strong ruler. He came back and he rather avenged for the defeat of the Mahendravarman I, and he rather killed Pulakeshin II and won himself the title of Vatapikonda. Now Vatapikonda, essentially in this language, it means the destroyer or the Vatapi. Vatapi was the capital of Pulakeshin II, and Vatapi was Pulakeshin II was killed by Narasimhavarman I. Hence, Narasimhavarman I gives himself the title of Vatapikonda, destroyer of the Vatapi. So I'll just sum up the two expeditions. Expedition 1, complete success. Pulakeshin II wins it. Wins the capital, wins the region Vengi from Mahendravarman I, gives it to his brother Vishnuvardhan, and Vishnuvardhan becomes the viceroy. Second expedition, when they fight again, this time Pulakeshin II is defeated, and Narasimhavarman I goes on to kill Pulakeshin II, and thus Narasimhavarman I gives himself the title of Vatapikonda. Okay, let's move ahead now. The next ruler that we have here is Vikramaditya I. Not really a very important ruler, but important to the extent that he was again a very able conqueror, and he made sure that the Pallavas who had come in Badami, they were pushed out. So I just said that Pulakeshin II was defeated at the hands of Narasimhavarman I. Vikramaditya I undid this, and he pushed them out of the Badami. So he basically re-established the authority of the Chalukyas. So he gave himself the title of Rajamalla. Now these titles, you can look at remembering them if possible, because sometimes they can ask you that this title is related to which king. And also he defeated the Cheras, Cholas and the Pandyas. So this is about Vikramaditya I. Now the next ruler that we have here is Vikramaditya II. Vikramaditya II was important because the dynasty reached its zenith or its peak again during his time. He invaded the territory of the Tondai Mandalam, which is essentially the southern Andhra Pradesh and the northern Tamil Nadu, and this region again was very important, and he registered several victories over the king Nandivarman II. Now let's talk about a Kannada inscription which Vikramaditya II had engraved in the Kailashnath temple, and this is actually a famous feat by this ruler, because after he defeated the Pallavas and he registered his victory, he put it up on an inscription in the Kailashnath temple of Kachi. So you should remember who had inscribed this Kannada inscription. Why Kannada? Because Kannada was the language of the Chalukyas. So Vikramaditya II had put this inscription in the Kailashnath temple in the Kannada on a victory pillar of the temple, right? And lastly, he was also known for the benevolence that he had towards the people and the famous monuments that he built in Kachi, because he had won over that region, he had won over the capital Kachi from the Pallavas, so he also built a few monuments there. Continuing Vikramaditya II, also during his reign, there were certain intrusions that happened in the southern Gujarat by the Arabs. Now Arabs, you see, around this time, they were also trying to come and invade India. We shall study about these events in the later lessons. But just remember that during the times of Vikramaditya II, Arab intrusions had also occurred, but they were defeated by Vikramaditya II. So you can sense that Vikramaditya II must have been a very strong and an able ruler too. He also overran the other traditional Tamil kingdoms like the Pandyas, the Cholas and the Cheras. Just to give you a sense of the strength and the might of this ruler, just remember his military feats and remember his victory against the Nandivarman, the Pallava king Nandivarman, and the victory pillar inscription in Kannada that he inscribed in the Kailashnath temple. So this is about Vikramaditya II. Lastly, we have this king Kirtivarman II here. Now Kirtivarman II does not really have anything important to his part except that he was the last ruler, and he was the one who was defeated by the Rashtrakuta king Danti Durga. Around 757 AD, they were finally defeated, and one of their feudatories, which is the Rashtrakutas, essentially Danti Durga was a Rashtrakuta. Rashtrakutas, they came into the prominence. So So this was about political history of the Western Chalukyas. We had Pulakeshin I, who was the founder, then Kirtivarman I, then Pulakeshin II, important ruler that you should remember, but he was defeated by the Pallava, Narasimhavarman I, Vatapikonda, and then Vikramaditya restored, then Vikramaditya II further won even more territories and the dynasty was at its peak again. But finally, during the times of Kirtivarmana, it was the Chalukyas were defeated by the Rashtrakuta king Danti Durga, and the Western Chalukyas of Badami were extinguished. Right. Now let's talk about the art and culture from these times of the Western Chalukyas. Now this is a dynasty which is noted for the kind of work it did towards art and architecture in the Deccan region. There are a lot of, in the Karnataka, specifically around Badami and Aihole and Patadakal, there are certain very famous temples, out of which one has even won a UNESCO heritage site. So this architecture, this art and architecture is attributed to this dynasty. Now the specific style that they developed is the Vesara or the Deccan style of the temple building. What is this Vesara? You will do it in your art and architecture art and culture course. That Vesara style is essentially a kind of a fusion of the Nagara or the North Indian and the Dravida or the South Indian style of temple building. So this style of temple building is attributed to the Western Chalukyas. Now this style finally it became more and more advanced and it reached its culmination under the Rashtrakutas and the Hoysalas. We will also look into these things as we progress in the later lessons, but just remember the development of this style of Vesara style of temple building, this goes to the Western Chalukyas of Badami. However, it is relatively in a smaller area, it's not really very widespread, and this is concentrated in these cities of Aihole, Badami, Patadakul and Mahakuta. This is all in your modern Karnataka state. Now let's look at these which are the prominent ones, certain names that I would want you to remember because they could be asked, also important from your art and culture perspective. Just remember certain names. There is a Lad Khan temple. This is actually a Hindu temple dedicated to Lord Shiva. This is at Aihole. Then there is a Meguti Jain temple. This is a Jain temple at Aihole. And this is what I was mentioning, the UNESCO heritage site, the Patadakal structural temples. They have been given the UNESCO heritage site status. And the famous temples, some names that you can remember, Sangameshwara temple, Virupaksha temple and the Mallikarjun temple, right? So these are certain names that you should try to remember where are they located and to which dynasty are they attributed. Also some very famous mural paintings in the Ajanta and the Ellora, they were also completed during the Chalukyan reign. Now, so we have dealt in detail with the Western Chalukyas of Badami. Let's now try and take a look at the Eastern Chalukyas of Vengi region. So first of all, let's try and understand where were they located. This is where you have Vengi somewhere. And this is essentially the region that they were ruling. Now, Vengi, I have spoken earlier, it was a strategic region because it was located between the river Godavari and Krishna, so very fertile and prosperous. Also, you can see that this is a coastal region, so maritime power is stronger if one controls this region, right? Now, let's try and understand how was this dynasty founded. So, it was founded by the Pulakeshin's brother Vishnuvardhan, who declared his independence after the Pulakeshin's death. Now, you should remember, I've spoken just a few minutes ago, that Pulakeshin II had gone on to win this region after he defeated the king Mahendravarman from the Pallava dynasty, and he placed it under his brother Vishnuvardhan. Now, after Pulakeshin II died, Vishnuvardhan declared his independence and he established this dynasty independently at Vengi in Andhra. Vengi is a place in Andhra Pradesh around 624 AD. So you've understood how was this established and how is this related to the Western Chalukyas. Vishnuvardhan was a brother of the Pulakeshin II who declared his independence after Pulakeshin II died. So their capital was at Vengi. Vengi is the modern city of Eluru in Andhra Pradesh, and later it was moved to Raja Mahendravarman. Now Raja Mahendravarman, this place presently called as the Rajamundry in Andhra Pradesh. So they had two capitals, at Vengi, and it was later shifted to Raja Mahendravarman. Right? And of course, they ruled over the strategic Vengi region, which was a constant cause of conflict between the Chola Empire here and the Chalukyas here. So this is the region that they essentially ruled. Now, the Eastern Chalukya dynasty, they had a very long and a stable rule. They ruled for almost around 5 centuries, and this is how they were able to develop this unified and efflorescent Telugu culture that we see in today's time. The beautiful Telugu literature, poetry, art, etc. It was all developed during this rule of the Eastern Chalukyas of India. As in, this is how it was started. However, around 999 AD, they were defeated by the Chola, the Raja Chola. He was again a mighty ruler of the Cholas, and Eastern Chalukyas were defeated at the hands of the Cholas, but still they continued ruling until almost 1189 as the feudatories of ruler. So this is how they had around some 5 centuries of rule. They started off, like I said, around 624 AD, and they ruled almost until 1189 AD, and they had around 5 centuries of rule. However, the kingdom was finally extinguished by the Hoysalas and the Yadavas of Deogi. Now, we've taken a quick introduction. Now, let's also understand briefly the political history of the Eastern Chalukyas and who were the key rulers. There was Vishnuvardhan, Pulakeshin II's brother, who was the founder. Then we had Vijayaditya I, Vijayaditya III, then Bhima I, and then Vijayaditya IV. Now, I'll just tell you, do you need to remember all of these rulers? Absolutely no. The ones which are important we will see, and I shall tell you if you should try and remember a certain ruler. Now, Vishnuvardhan you should remember because he was the founder and he was the one who established this dynasty. Other ruler that you can remember from this dynasty is Vijayaditya II, because Vijayaditya II was the one who was the most important, who had the maximum successful military expedition. He won against the Rashtrakutas, he won against the Gangas, and he even led certain campaigns into the Gujarat. Even the Rashtrakuta inscriptions, they have been noted to say that the glory of the Rashtrakutas was drowned in the ocean of the Chalukyas. Essentially, they are talking about Vijayaditya here. So he was such a mighty ruler of the Eastern Chalukya dynasty. Next you have Vijayaditya III. He had also won over the Pallavas, the Pandyas, the Gangas, the Rashtrakutas, the Kalachuris, and the South Kosala. So he continued the legacy of the Vijayaditya II, and he also won over many small big kingdoms, and he consolidated the power of Vengi. He even gave shelter to a Chola king. So you can imagine, Cholas themselves were a very strong empire, but Vijayaditya III was strong enough to be giving shelter to a Chola king. Then you have Bhima I. Bhima I was defeated and he was captured by the Rashtrakuta, but he was later released. But just remember that he comes from this dynasty. Lastly, you have Vijayaditya IV. You must understand that from his reign, there were very small reigns of his coming successors and even his own reign. So with such small rules, the succession disputes started coming up, and the Rashtrakutas, they took an advantage. They started interfering and they would back one or the other contender against each other, divide and rule kind of a policy. And ultimately, this dynasty, it started facing a great amount of political instability, and finally in 999 AD, it was conquered by the king Raja Chola. He was a very strong Chola ruler, and they were lost to Raja, and it was conquered by the king Raja Chola. So this is about the Eastern Chalukyas. I'll just quickly recap. He was Vishnuvardhan. It was founded by the Vishnuvardhan, who was the brother of Pulakeshin II. After Pulakeshin II's death, he declared his independence from the Western Chalukyas and established the Eastern Chalukyas at Vengi. Then Vijayaditya II, he was a strong ruler, the most important ruler of this dynasty, and he won over very many dynasties, and even Rashtrakutas have admitted his might. Then came Vijayaditya III. He continued the legacy of Vijayaditya I, and he also won over very many great small and big kingdoms. But after Bhima I, you can see that Bhima I was defeated by the Rashtrakutas. But particularly after Vijayaditya IV, the succession disputes started coming up. They had very small rules of 6 months, fortnight. So this ultimately led to a lot amount of political instability, and finally in 999 AD they lost to the Cholas, and it was ultimately conquered by the Rajaraja Chola. But still they continued their rule until 1189 AD as the feudatories of Chola. Sorry, this is 1189 AD as the feudatories of Chola. Now we've come to the end of these three branches, and the last branch of the Chalukyas is the later Western Chalukyas of Kalyani. Let's look at this. So the later Western Chalukyas of Kalyani are called so because they were essentially a descendants of the Badami Chalukyas, the one that we studied at the start of the lecture. The Badami Chalukyas, they were the later Western Chalukyas are a descendants of that Chalukya branch. Now after those Chalukyas were destroyed, I spoke that the Chalukyas in the reign of the Kirtivarman II, they were destroyed by the Rashtrakuta king Dantidurga. So then they were extinguished for some time, and they were not in rule. But after almost a break of 2 centuries, they were revived around 972-73 AD, and there was this ruler called Telapa II, who was a feudatory of the Rashtrakuta, and he established an independent empire at Kalyani. Kalyani is the modern name of Basav Kalyan city in the Karnataka. It is somewhere near the Gulbarg region. I couldn't find the map from those times, so this is the modern map that you can see, and it is somewhere here near the Gulbarga city. So they had their capital at Kalyani, modern day Basav Kalyan city, and the key source of information about this dynasty is the Gadak inscription of the king Vikramaditya VI from this dynasty. So remember, the later Western Chalukyas of Kalyani were essentially the descendants of the Badami Chalukyas, and they revived after their loss at the hands of the Rashtrakuta king Dantidurga almost after 2 centuries. They were established by the ruler called Telapa II, who was essentially a feudatory of the Rashtrakuta. They had their capital at Kalyani. Kalyani is the older name for the city Basav Kalyan of the present day Karnataka, and the key source of information about this dynasty is the Gadag inscription of the king Vikramaditya VI. Lastly, they were also destroyed by the Hoysala Empire around 12th century. So they had a rule for around, you can say 2 centuries, 1.5-2 centuries. But this empire is noted for the great contribution that they made towards the Kannada literature and the Sanskrit literature. So this great Kannada poet Ranna, I'm sure we have heard of him, Ranna, Adikavi Pampa and Sri Ponna, they are called as the 3 gems of the Kannada literature. One of these, Ranna, he was at the court of Telapa II, right? So just remember, this is one fact that you should try to remember, that the one of the 3 gem of the Kannada literature, Ranna, was at the court of the Telapa II, who was the founder of the later Western Chalukyas of Kalyani. And this is the Chalukya Empire, you can see at its peak. So some regions of Andhra, Bengivans, then Karnataka, most of it, then Maharashtra, even until the southern Gujarat. Just to show you how vast and great, inclusive of all the 3 branches of Chalukyas, just to show you how vast this empire was. So so far we have covered the 3 branches of the Chalukyas of the Deccan region, which were ruling in 600 to 750. Now see, these timelines that I have given, they wouldn't be very strict, but just to give you an idea of how we have tried to split the entire medieval history into certain phases, and for it to be easier to remember these things, we have done it, but don't take them too strictly and like as a thumb rule. Still, to give you a sense of what all we have covered this phase 600 to 750 AD for both the North India region and the Deccan region. Now in the next lecture, we shall be dealing with the far south region, wherein we'll have those 4 dynasties. In the later lessons, then we'll start with the phase 2 of the early medieval India. So that's all we have for today. And thank you so much for watching. For more such videos for your UPSC preparation, you can log on to scholar.com. Thank you.